Welcome everybody to Tech Breakfast. Barry and I are excited you're here, and we've got two guests today. The first one, we're going to flip it, I guess. We're going to have Dave Hill first and talk about some of the things, and then we'll jump into Nate. So take it away, Barry.
Yeah, I mean, Dave is going to talk about his new product extensively. It's called Interstellar, and I've already reviewed it for Mix. You could read my review if you can find that. It is A to D converter and master clock. And I have to give props to Eric Zobler, who comes once in a while to these things. But Eric has been doing, he's been using a Grimm clock to clock all of his interfaces. I have 5 interfaces now, and he's been using this Grimm clock. And I asked him about that, and he uses it in what they call a star configuration. In other words, Pro Tools has your loop sync, where it just daisy chains the clock through the interfaces, and then you loop back to the first interface. And from the standpoint of changing sample set, getting around sessions in Pro Tools, it's pretty handy. However, I instantly heard a difference in sound when I would do as Eric's been doing for a few years now. He's been clocking it in star configuration from his Grimm. And you think, is this hearable? I mean, am I going to hear this, or is this some kind of like inside techie thing that, it's hearable? I mean, immediately, as soon as I had a session that I listened to a bit that was clocked the regular way, the usual Pro Tools way, which, by the way, Avid does not recommend doing this, I might add. They're kind of like, it doesn't work that way. But anyway, and I changed over. I had a way to change over right away to clock it in star config, and a difference right away. The same audio. I'm not doing anything other than changing some cables around, and then you have to go into hardware setup and verify that they're all getting the right clock. So that alone is going to make a big difference in your sound, whether you're recording or mixing. So Dave's clock is probably superior to the Grimm. I'm understanding that it is even better than the Grimm. It's extremely tight. And then you have his analog digital converter on top. So the interesting thing about the A to D converter is it has his various analog. What do you call those, Dave? What do you
like coloring?
Coloring, yeah. I was going to say that. I thought maybe it was something. So you can record through those things, and let me tell you, it's nice to have the facility. Say you're overdubbing a bass guitar, to be able to use that tape. The tape one for bass. I really love that thing for a bass guitar. And it just sounds so good. It sounds like you're pinning a analog tape deck. And so anyway, Dave, take it away. I'm talking too much about it, but
yeah, well, okay. So one of the most difficult things in doing this, in actually developing and getting a clock that works well enough to start with, is none of the standard test gear works in making the measurements. They don't go low enough. You can't just measure a word clock output. None of that kind of test gear works. An AP doesn't work. The Stanford box doesn't work. It takes really specialized stuff. And the thing that you have to keep in mind is the place where jitter matters is at the actual conversion process, whether it's AD or DA. And what happens is, if you're dividing down to say 44.1 or 96K or whatever it is from your internal thing, each time you divide that clock frequency in half, you get a 6 dB improvement in phase noise, which results in lower jitter. So if you start out with something that's really, really good to start with, and you divide down, you get something that's really amazingly good. Now, what happens though is you feed that word clock into other boxes, and you're going to be dependent upon how the phase lock loop in those other boxes respond to it. In general, what will happen and I've measured this in the Avid boxes, it doesn't really improve the high frequency portion of the jitter, but it does improve the low frequency or close in phase noise is what it's called. And that improvement in jitter on the low frequency end does a couple things. It gives you a wider sound stage, a better defined bottom, and it helps smooth some things out. And it helps with transient kind of stuff. You know, like attacks on drums become more lifelike as opposed to being dull and just kind of there. And you can debate a little bit as to why this would all relate to how it does back to affecting the sound the way it does. But it's really a night and day difference. And once you hear it, it's kind of really hard to go back. Now, the other part of this that one has to be careful about is you hear a lot of stuff, well, this converter sounds warm, or this one's warm, or I like this or that. Well, to an uneducated ear, some of this stuff will be warm, but once you learn to recognize what jitter is doing, you hear a lot of it as mud, as opposed to actually being a warmth. And once you start, your ear starts learning that, you learn to hate it really fast, and you just really can't go back to it. And there is some point in theory that, okay, below a certain level, it's good enough, but I'm not really sure where that is. Because it seems like that if you solve one problem and you make that part really better, then all of a sudden you're hearing something that was never significant before. So, and some of that can relate to the filters and the converters and, all sorts of things. The other thing that happens in trying to do this ultra low jitter stuff is printed circuit board layout is insanely difficult to make it work. What happens is you end up having to treat everything like RF transmission lines, anything where there's any reflections or irregularities. It's signal integrity. And you can kind of think of it as in the analog world, what happens when, gee, I don't like the sound of this track, and hook up this compressor and that and a couple EQs, and all of a sudden you get all this crap in the audio path, and you turn it off and you go, gee, it sounds better if I shut everything off and just have the pure signal. The same kind of thing does happen, with this clocking issue and other sort of things, in the digital domain. It's the more junk in the signal path, the more it deteriorates. So you have to find ways to keep that really clean, keep it really minimal. And then you have to be able to actually measure it in some manner to know that it's actually doing what it should be doing, which is the harder part about it. There are ways to specifically measure jitter or phase noise. They are expensive, and it is difficult. And you'll find that a lot of this, it becomes temperature issues with it. Well, it turns out that, if you walk into your room and turn everything on and run a mix while everything's cold, it's not so good. Best to let everything warm up for a half hour to an hour. Analog gear, converters, clocks, everything. If it warms up, it's more stable, works better. So in doing all of this, Tony, you got a question there?
I did have a question, but so let everything warm up for more than half an hour, huh?
Yeah, it'll make a difference.
All right.
Yeah, I found that it doesn't even see, well, yeah, you have to do that. You just boot up Pro Tools, let it cook for a while. And
it's not just Pro Tools, it's any analog, anything, compressors,
yeah,
equalizers, anything. It all really needs to warm up.
The clock, the Interstellar, it runs warm to the touch. And it's intentional, I believe.
Well, yeah, it's the clock circuit itself is about a watt and a half of power, and it's a small module in a metal cage times 2, because you got the 44 1K multiples and the 48K multiples, and you have to be able to generate all of them. And essentially, the clock is being generated by an analog Class A kind of circuit. Whereas there's less expensive ways to do it. There's off-the-shelf parts, but you just can't get this kind of performance when you do that. You know, there's a thing called direct digital synthesis, which is closest to like what a sampler does. You have one clock reference, whether it's 10 megs or whatever you want, and it synthesizes the other frequencies. But it's spurious, meaning it's got all kinds of spikes in its spectrum, and it's not that clean. Just doesn't work that well when you're looking for high precision. You know, back many years ago, well, maybe not that many years ago, when video tape and all of that was a big deal and you needed to pull up and to pull downs, the direct digital synthesis was nice because you could have one clock reference and generate any frequency, and it was cheap to do it. Doing what I'm doing, the raw quartz crystals, which are custom made in quantities, are almost $50 each. Yeah. We have about a 5% loss on them. Place builds them, they test them, we put them in our circuit, we test it, then we finish packaging it and retest it again at operating temperature. We have about a 5% failure on it, where it doesn't meet the spec. And the spec was sort of arrived at. I was doing the DA with this, and okay, I got a crystal, you know, an oscillator working, a clock working, and I would do a lot of listening over days, same passages. And what I found on certain complex material, that the difference of the phase noise or jitter from at 10 hertz from center frequency, from -105 to -110 was clearly audible. Once you trained your ear to hear what you were hearing, it was like you could walk in blind and you would know. So what I ended up doing is I set my minimum spec at -110 at 10 hertz and less than 1 picosecond, measured down to 1 hertz. Now, a lot of this stuff, the common off-the-shelf things, they'll give you a spec from 12 kilohertz up and up. Great for RF, great for computers, not so good for audio. There are a couple better off-the-shelf parts, you know, for clocking for audio. The only thing I've ever seen commercially available that had really good specs in the range of what I'm doing or better, they were $1,500 each, times 2, and to get your frequencies for your converter. Becomes very unpractical very quick. The whole rubidium atomic clock thing, it's bullshit. It doesn't work.
Yeah, that was the atomic clock everybody talked about for so long, and that's a 10 megahertz baseband. And
yeah, and then you have to do some direct digital synthesis or something to get your other frequencies. But when you look at the spec of what's on the market for that atomic clock thing, at 10 hertz, I think the noise is like -95. It's not good. Mm-mm. You know, you can get a $5 oscillator that works better than that, you know, from DigiKey or Mauser or any of those places. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with all of that. But gee, it sounds warm. Well, is it warmth or is it jitter?
I'm gonna, while you're talking, I'm gonna do a little screen share here and show you what this thing looks like. Boom.
So just for clarification, Dave.
Yeah.
I have the Crane Song head.
Okay.
So Quantum is the newer version of the head?
Yes. Well, there's a Quantum head, there's a Quantum AD, and then there's something called Solaris, which was a Quantum DA. And it is, the clocking on it is significantly better than the head 192. Night and day difference. The converter chips are significantly better also. Night and day difference. And when you do the A/B between them, it's sort of like you can't go back. You got to just deal with it. You know, and it's not like the head's a bad sounding box or anything. You know, it has a nice warmth to it. It's fairly musical, but this is just so much more transparent. It really, really works. The other thing about Interstellar, which is a useful trick, is it has a USB interface in it. And USB in drivers is such a nightmare that you won't believe it. But I found some guys in Germany that have a driver. It's like Polytech, I think is kind of the name of it. It's kind of a funny spelling to it. And they're good to work with. They're responsive. And so they did the USB driver for this for Windows. For Mac, it works just basic standard Mac interface kind of stuff. And the cool part about it is they also did the USB interface chip inside of the box, which just runs on an ARM processor, and you know, you pay them their royalties, and you know, on a per basis for each box that you sell. And what happened is their chip is a off-the-shelf ARM part that they have software for, and it works. The other part that, like I used in Solaris, can't get them. Yeah, you know, so Solaris has to get redone. I'm going to switch it to the Polytech driver and this ARM part, because the beautiful thing about ARM chips is if you're really stuck and one chip becomes unavailable, chances are you can find another one that's going to work. You know, because the ARM thing, it's the core is basically the same, the peripherals are the same. Just about every semiconductor company on the planet makes ARM processors. You know, so you're a little bit better off as far as that whole problem. Because right now there's, you know, chips and stuff, I'm seeing 65-week lead times on it. And you have to be able to build things with parts you can get. You know, that's the real difficult part. I'm spending half my time redesigning things around because of parts I can't get anymore. Some of the companies just said, oh, we're just not going to make them anymore. Some of them, you know, they just have these ridiculous lead times.
So if I upgrade from the head to the quantum, is it a width, depth kind of a thing? I'm going to be.
It's depth, width. It is definition in transients. It's details, smoothness and richness in vocals. Vocals become, you know, richer, less harsh on things. It's everything you can imagine, and some things you don't even suspect. Reverb trails are more apparent. You can hear them better. I just did a thing for somebody the other day that, well, the end of this tune, it's just a bunch of racket with drums and all this other stuff going on. It's for some video thing. Old system, it's just smeared. New system, you can hear every transient and every detail in it. It doesn't sound like racket on the new system. Yeah, you know, it's just quite amazing how much difference it can make. Makes a difference in choral music. Yeah, you know, if you get in a good room with nice acoustics and stuff, you can hear the room in those details a lot better than compared to the old system. And a lot of that has to do with the clocking.
Any questions for Dave?
I can tell you that when you are using a good A to D and clock, when you're recording, is the biggest improvement right away. Because you are clocking the actual recording from analog to digital conversion and all that. So that really makes a big difference, really big difference. Since I use analog summing, I re-record the mix back into Pro Tools. So that's where I engage his converter. And I noticed it right away. That and the star config, if you have a lot of interfaces. Not everyone has a lot of interfaces, but if you have more than one, you should be doing it that way.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that one of the guys that worked for me when I did the first listening test with Quantum and compared it with like the Head 192 and then going to Quantum, he says, well, with Head 192, it's like you're listening to a recording. With Quantum, it's like you're there, is how he described it.
Dave, can any of these components be used to upgrade the Spider?
I have on my bench.
Hey, Nate.
Recorders working, Spider Quantum converters.
Awesome. I mean, I got my Avasets upgraded, and I love them to death. I actually I still use one of them for stereo, but my 5.1 I put it on the market to sell because I needed to get Atmos ready. But I have two of the Spiders currently in the main room that I work out of, and I have a ton of other pre's in that room, and I just don't use them. I end up using, if I'm only using 16 channels, I just use all Spider. In conjunction with the other stuff that it has in it, the other feature sets that the Spider has. I'm just wondering, do you have an estimate of whenever that would be?
I'm hoping
early next year,
or worst case. I've used Quantum Spider to do a couple sessions at this point. I'm doing the board revisions and cleanup and what do you mean I can't get that chip for 2 years, or that one they don't make anymore? So I'm dealing with that stuff. But I'm doing all the board revisions. But yeah, I've done a few sessions with it, and it's like, it's crazy. It's the same thing like what Barry's talking about with Interstellar, what he's hearing with the AD. Well, it's that kind of thing that's happening. It's a completely different world. The detail is and the transients, it's just.
And I'm coming from a Benchmark Media ADC1 is what I had before, and that's not junk. And it just, I mean, they can't even afford to make that box anymore. The chips, either they can't get them or they're too expensive. That's what.
Well, I've run into, I'm just finished redoing part of Avaset because the headphone amplifier chips I can't get. They can't even give you a TI. Texas Instruments can't give you a delivery time. Some of the Chinese distributor brokers have access to them at $300 each. It's a $5
right. Yeah, that's basically not available.
Yeah, basically not available. And you need two of them. And it's like, no. So I've designed a new headphone amplifier. I'm just actually getting the files ready to go to the board joint, either tomorrow or Monday and I've done it with mostly discrete parts, a couple chips, and it's cleaner. It's actually a 12 dB improvement in noise floor on the headphone, but it's also taken 4 weeks of time to get there.
So with all the craziness that's going on with trying to get parts, I mean, where are we with?
Now, it's gotten worse. Basically, it's gotten worse. And I have a stereo compressor coming that has a Ethernet interface in it. It's based upon the Titan thing, and it does some STC tricks and all sorts of things like that. The control board, sidechain board, has been redesigned 4 times because of part availability. And this is also software intensive. And what I did the last time through is, okay, I can get these parts. So I got a big box of parts sitting in my office to be able to build this thing, because it's the only way. It's got a 4.3-inch touchscreen on it, LCD. Well, I had to buy those too. They're just sitting there. Because what I found is if you manage to find somebody who has some of this stuff, it's gone in a week. Because everybody's in the same boat trying to look at, I need parts to build this stuff in January, February, or July next year. If I don't buy the parts now, I'm not going to have them. So that's what all the manufacturers are doing. And it's just crazy because all of a sudden it's like, you know, these LCD screens are $55 a pop. You know, all of a sudden you're getting big piles of cash tied up in parts that you may not use for a year. But that's the only way you can do it, because nobody can tell you reliably when you're going to get stuff. We had one of the arm parts we used, we were supposed to have 100 showing up in April, and you know, the bill paying person here is freaking out, and it's like, we don't want to be paying for these now. And I said, you ain't gonna have to worry about that. They're not going to deliver them anyways. A, they didn't deliver them, and B, they can't even tell us when. And you know, and being small and limited resources, the whole parts thing's a bloody nightmare. When you're big, it still doesn't help, because like Tesla can't deliver cars because they can't get microprocessors.
Yep. And they're not the only car manufacturer. Yeah. All of them are. Yeah.
I got a intern guy who's, you know, well, he's becoming more than an intern. Met him through the AES student design competition. He was one of the entries. I was a judge. He lives outside of Salzburg. And so we're working together. He's doing a bunch of the software on the Ethernet and the plugin and that kind of thing. And we're doing some hardware things together and stuff like that. And he wants to learn audio. Really smart guy. Martin Reese, not sure how you pronounce his last name. But he was working for a company that sold Teslas, and they were developing a universal charging station for electric cars, you know, throughout Austria. Well, the place basically is gone because they couldn't get cars to sell. You know, and this happened in the last month. Can't finish developing the charger things because we can't even get cars to sell anymore. It's crazy.
Hey, Dave, one more question about the Interstellar. You had mentioned it has USB support, and for a typical, like, say I have an interface with me that's like a UAD audio or something like that, and I'm in Pro Tools. As I'm switching my sample rates, the converter will automatically do that. One of the problems that we traditionally run into with a lot of the external converters is people will set the sample rate incorrectly, like inconsistent with what's happening in the actual DAW, and then later they send that off to somebody and it's been clocked wrong, so it's a different speed and pitch.
So with Interstellar, there's a way to run it non-USB standalone, and there's a way to run it USB. And what happens in USB mode is computer through DAW sets the sample rate.
Yeah, the computer sample rate.
Yeah.
That's what the Interstellar will clock to.
Yeah. Now, if you were doing multiple interfaces in something like Pro Tools, I think Pro Tools tends to be a little unhappy about different interface stuff, and it lets you have one playback engine, and who knows what kind of nightmare that's going to create. But if you're doing, you know, a guy friend's got a studio about an hour and a half drive from here, and he went down to Minneapolis 2 weeks ago to record some saxophone stuff for a project, and he took an Interstellar and a Solaris in his computer, and being he was only doing saxophone tracks anyways, worked perfectly, because there's an output. The Interstellar allows audio in and out, but even though it's just an AD, so on the back of it there's a diff output that goes to a DA that you can use for monitoring, and then you just have one you know, USB interface to work with, you know, and worry about. So it makes a nice clean portable rig. Or for a small system where somebody's just, you know, they never record more than 1 or 2 tracks at a time.
As soon as you connect Interstellar with a USB cable to your computer, it'll go right there.
Yep.
So
Jeffrey's got a question for you.
Sure.
got a pic of the back of the unit. Let me look. Maybe.
Jeffrey, did you have a question?
I did. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I got you.
Thank you, Tony. David, regarding the LCD screens, have you tried considering using other computer technology and reverse engineering it, such as a color e-ink screen? True, you won't get the high resolution of LCD, but e-ink technology is cheaper than LCD and more readily available. Or
No, haven't looked into that, you know.
you want to look into that. I do IT, so look into e-ink technology. E is an echo dash ink. They make color, but the black and white gray is extremely low power. You can use basically a Raspberry Pi kind of interface. So there's a lot of other tech out there that you might want to look at, like Raspberry Pi and other computer technology, even on a Linux-based scenario, because it sounds like a lot of these audio part component issues. I was at NAMM this year, and at one of the AES shows, they were talking about part shortage and how a lot of companies are now using PoE technology or reverse engineering PoE technology for the lack of parts to make their stuff work.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good idea, because you know, the like on Interstellar, that's basically a cell phone part. And I'm going to hope for a long time that, you know, cell phones, flip phones, and that kind of thing are common, but you just really never know. The bigger one that I'm doing is the 4.3 inch.
Oops, wrong one.
Yeah.
Whoops.
David, the other thing is, instead of going with the ARM processor, also look at Snapdragon. That's a competitor to ARM. And those are huge and everywhere in all countries. So you can get basically a burner phone, as they call it, using a Snapdragon processor. And those things are dirt cheap and everywhere. And they're comparable to an ARM processor. Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, it's all worth it. You got to look to see what's out there these days, because you just can't count on any one thing. And I, you know, with the ARM stuff, I'm writing it all in assembler. So yeah, I'm weird. I don't do much C coding. I do everything in assembler, because that's just what I learned, and I like it. And it's pretty easy for me to convert stuff from, you know, one processor to the next. If it's a 32-bit processor, okay, this instruction here is called add with, and this one over here has a slightly different name, but it does the same thing. Okay, you can deal with it. You can see on the center kind of top on that picture, that's the audio output connection that you would feed to a DAC. And then to the right-hand side, there, you know, standard, you know, AES, Toslink kind of thing, SPDIF. Now, one of the things is with this is when you're using USB, the other stereo outputs are still active. You know, so it's not like one or the other. It keeps everything working all the time.
Question, is your USB type 2 or type 3?
Type 2.
Okay. Are you gonna consider going type C at all?
We'll see. It's a little bit of it's not my choice. It's the driver. And I've talked to other people about writing drivers, and even looked into it enough on our end here, and went, you want somebody with a lot of experience doing that. Windows drivers are a nightmare.
Last thing, and I'm done, but regarding the audio drivers, your default standard for Windows is ASIO, and that's been around for 30 years.
Right.
So you can just use a generic ASIO audio driver, which would be compatible across the board regarding whatever flavor of Windows you're using.
Yeah.
From 95 up.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. This Polytech guys, they have what they've done is it bypasses the standard Windows driver interface and gets into the kernel somehow, and it's, you can have the driver latency can be down into the 1 and 2 millisecond range. plus whatever buffers you have set up, in your workstation, which is, going to be a little bit dependent upon how fast the computer is and all of that. But what they did works pretty well. Some people are concerned about latency. If you're using it for mastering or mixing, it doesn't really matter. But if you're using it for recording.
I'm interested. Does anybody, what sample rates are you all working at? Like Dylan, what sample rate are you working at? Are you 2448?
Yeah, I'm 2448 typically. Sometimes I do 32, depending on there's often not a benefit for doing the high bit rate stuff, depending on if a lot of stuff is being written with soft samplers and stuff like that. There could be a benefit there, but people sometimes ask me why I do a lot of sample based production. A lot of the stuff that we work with is with samples, and we do a lot of time compression expansion, and that's where I find the benefit of that little more than 44.1 really helps. I don't really care if I get a session to mix and it's 44.1. Since I'm primarily a mix engineer, a lot of that stuff is not up to me because it was actually chosen before, at the writing stage or something like that. So, but if I get
surprised that people are still, it's just me, but I'm still surprised that people are still using 44.1 in LA.
Yeah, I'm a
2448's been a standard film standard for a while. You know what I mean? So
I'm much more agnostic than a lot of my peers are whenever it comes to sample rate stuff. But I do have my preferences. 48 seems to be the one that helps, because if I get in the higher sampling rate stuff, it can be problematic with DSP issues, and I can't get the mix done because I'm slamming the computer too hard. If I got a session that was higher than 96K, I would downsample that very quickly and save it for archiving or something like that most of the time. But that's just me.
Yeah.
How about everyone else?
The thing that I find, and I tend to do 192 when I can, but a lot of 96, and the higher sample rate, the signal processing just sounds better. But then I'm not doing much with synth or stuff. I'm doing, a lot of vocal things, acoustic kind of things. And, so my world's a little bit different here.
In the space of 2 weeks, I did a straight ahead jazz project that was at 2496. And then interspersed in there, I jumped into a funk jazz project that was 2444. And going between those two was driving me nuts. Absolutely. I was just like, God, can we just get fixed on one thing, guys? Just
what's 44? I've never worked with that.
44.1.
CD.
Yeah.
Oh God, sorry. I guess I've been in film too long. Sorry, guys.
But that's the thing. That's what I'm saying, though, Sarah, is that in LA, if you're working in LA, it's usually a 2448 world, and that's just that.
Usually, although I have done it different, although it had to do with film and pulling up and pulling down in the field. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but I did a film many, many years ago. We were shooting film. It was back in those days, 35 millimeter. And so automatically,
you pull down.
Well, automatically I was rolling at 35, non-drop, and at 30 non-drop at 48K. So, and this was to tape on DAT. These were inexperienced producers, and they didn't understand post, which I didn't find out till later. So, but basically they decided, since it was going to end up on video, that they didn't need to go through the NLE, the nonlinear editing situation, which is where you take the sound and the film and it goes through together so that it stays in sync, and there's a time change, but it stays in sync because it goes through it together. They were only doing that with the film. They weren't doing with the sound. So so nothing was in sync. And I didn't find this out. I did 2 12-day shoots with them, and I found out what they were doing after the first one. We went into the next one. So they just wanted me to record at 2997 at 48K. And I'm like, that's never going to work. But they said, do it or we'll get somebody else. And I'm like, it's your movie. So so after the first one, so then once I knew that, going into the second film, what I did was I recorded at 2997, but at 48.048.
Yeah.
And that technically made it 30 non-drop. So when they played it back at 48, I did the conversion for them without telling them ahead of time. And they got to post, they're like, it was the first time anything had been in sync and they didn't understand that. And I was like, you guys are idiots, bye. But yeah, there are times where we do various speeds to adjust for things like that. And that's not even accounting for playback and music. I've got a film we shot last year that's a music one that comes out at the end of July. And so when we did playback on all the songs, that we had multiple different speeds to do playback on for depending on what speed the camera is going to shoot at.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done any film related stuff, because there was a guy in town that used to do some television work, sometimes 16, sometimes 35 millimeter, but a lot of industrial documentary kind of stuff. And that was usually 16 millimeter and, you know, Nagger kind of thing, walking down I-beams on a bridge 200 feet in the air, you know, chasing painters and iron workers. It was a different world, but interesting. Yeah. And you don't make a, you know, tied off, because if you step in the wrong place.
It's cool to see the number of people who are working at 96K.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you look in the chat, Matt and Tyler and Les, and, I find it interesting. That's really cool.
I've been doing it as well, but I'm not sure I'm noticing any great audio improvement, because most of the stuff these days I'm just fixing everybody else's screwed up sessions. Yeah. But I had to work at 96K once. I just left it there, and just to see if the system would handle it. And so far, so good.
I just do it mostly for vocal tuning. If I'm recording a singer, I know I'm going to be tweaking a lot just to give it some more numbers to crunch. I don't really think I can audibly tell the difference or anything, but yeah.
Well, yeah. See, one of the things that happens is the artifacts from some of this stuff, there's like a threshold. And if you're below that threshold, you're okay. But if you're close to it, additional processing somewhere down the line is going to, might bump it up, and all of a sudden things are getting weird and you're not really sure why that's taking place. So, yeah, my basic rule is assume something's going to deteriorate what you're doing, so try and make it better to start with.
What do you think is the sweet spot, David?
Minimally 96.
Oh, minimally?
Yeah.
So I'm the riffraff.
Yeah, minimally 96. Although I do get stuff in here to do with people, for people that's 44.1, and you can make it work. Yeah, but minimally 96 if I'm doing anything real.
I had a really weird thing the other day where we had done the whole Manhattan Transfer stuff at 2448, and the record label called and said, well, can we get higher stereo mixes of these? And I was just like, well, no. It was done at 2448, so I don't know what to tell you. They go, well, could you just bump it up just for us for 2496? And I said, the project is at 2498. It doesn't make a difference what I bump it up to. The project still originated and was all completely mixed at 2498. I mean, at 2448. And they've called 3 times wanting to ask for a higher sample rate.
Just give it to them.
Well, now here's a funny thing about this, because I've just been going through this on a DA converter, and you would think that upsampling is not going to give you any additional benefit, but it can. But you have to be careful, because some of the software and stuff that does that, the filters aren't very good, and then you don't get any real benefit. But there are cases where doing the upsample actually does sound better.
Well, my buddy Eric Zobler swears by it. He converts everything he works on. He bumps to 96 right out of the box. He doesn't even.
I know of at least one mastering room in London where they do that, and the people there are really good. And
yeah, I mean, I said, does it sound better? And he goes, yeah, it makes a difference in processing. I think he's talking about plugins and such. So, yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, hit it.
Okay, I realized my mic wasn't off. Tony, one thing, Tony, when they deliver to the label, Apple's going to flag that stuff as not being true 96K and kick it back out. So you might as well save yourself the time and just tell them it's natively recorded at 48K, even if you up-res it to work at 96. That's what I do. I bring everything in because PureMix allows me to work at multiple sample rates within the box. I operate within a 3296 container all the time. That way, all my processing's happening in a 3296 world. And then I dumb down. But if like I just had this yesterday with Universal, they requested 2496 HD, and I just said, I can deliver that if you want me to up-res, but it was 2448 max as natively recorded. So, and they said, okay, no problem. I thought you were 2448 then.
Yeah, I think it would be weird. I mean, I understand why they want it, but originally when they did the first half of the album, it was all 2444. And then, the orchestra was recorded at 2448. And so I brought everything up to 2448 and we overdubbed and mixed. But, when most of the project was started at 2444, and, I just didn't see the value in going to 96 at that point, But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Well, if you're gonna mix it, there's definitely a benefit to getting. 96K is definitely important. I find being in a 32-bit environment makes an even bigger difference. At least it does on when I get mixes in that we're mixing a 32-bit environment. Like even if it's the identical Pro Tools session just converted to 32-bit, it sounds way better. So I tend to work in that world, and then I'll move out to fixed when I'm outputting to whatever I'm outputting to.
Pretty cool.
I
questions for Dave.
Oh yeah. Any more questions? I got a hold of Nate, who was supposed to be here for Cali Audio, and I don't know, he spaced. So he's here. He'll be here August for the August meeting, and that'll go with who we have for August, which is Trident, Alan Hyatt.
Okay.
So I thought I'd jump that in there. Yeah, long story. Anyway, he had car trouble or something or other. Anyway, he's on for August. Sorry about it.
So free Cali monitors for everybody? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, go in and try to make them feel bad. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But it was surround, right? So free surround rooms.
There we go.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Questions for Dave? I could tell you I have the new firmware update Dave sent me, which changes the front panel a little bit.
Yeah, well, and they're all shipping with that. So
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to clarify one thing here, how this works. So these 8 BNCs, which by the way, as far as I know, nobody else has 8 BNCs. The Grimm is 6. Anyway, I have separate cables from each one of these to my 4 Avid interfaces and the H9K. So you have to run these cables. That's how I do it. And then over here on the front panel, you have your sample rate selection and function knob, but this triode, pentode, and tape, if anybody was wondering, are colorations, and you can have any mix of them. Let's see if I got a better. Yeah, this is the old filter. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So, and you can dial in how much of each one of these you have, although the triode is not in this picture. This is an old. So anyway, that's just wanted to chuck that in there for you.
Dave, are you going to be at AES?
Thinking about it. AES, in New York, it's a little bit of an odd deal because exhibits are 2 days. They're still charging $3,000 for the floor space for 10 by 10.
Yep.
So, I would like to go, but by the time all said and done, if I did that and ship the crate and all of that stuff, I'd be spending $9,000 to do it. So I'm thinking about alternatives to do it so it's affordable. Either share some space and show up with just a rack or something. I don't know right now. But spending that kind of money seems a little crazed at the moment.
It's always something, dude.
Yeah.
It was a nutty show to begin with the union. So.
Oh yeah, well, one of the last times we were there, they delivered the crate a day late, and when they ran it in on the forklift, they dumped it off the thing and dumped it on its side onto the floor. The union there is crazy.
The NAB show is at the same time, and I believe you can get in on the same ticket. So if that's of any attraction to anybody, you can do that when you're there. And it is New York.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm going, but it's expensive, but I'm going.
When is it?
Well, like my wife is saying, New York, not so interested. Could we go to London?
It's almost the same money, huh?
It's actually cheaper.
Tony knows about international travel.
Yeah, I just had to buy a couple round trip plane tickets to an obscure place in Michigan that was cheap, that was more expensive than flying round trip to London.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at flying to London in August, and it is amazing how I think the prices have significantly gone up in the last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I think so.
Significantly.
I remember it used to be easy to find $300 round trips before the pandemic, so it's nowhere near that anymore. Yeah.
$1,200 for a coach.
6, 7, 8.
Yeah, I'm heading at the end of next month, and it was $3,000 to bring me and my wife and my daughter. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, see, flying out of Duluth Superior, because Julie, my wife, just looked to London, and it was about $1,100 a ticket, which is actually better than it's been. But it's this Duluth to Minneapolis leg, or Duluth to Chicago leg, that kills you. They always add $500 for. It's 150 miles to Minneapolis. Why is it $500?
On one of those little airplanes.
Well,
supply and demand.
Yeah, then it's $500 to get from Minneapolis to London, and it's like, it's nuts.
And I just flew from Germany. I did LAX to London. To Charles de Gaulle, and that round trip ticket. I thought the whole time, well, this is pretty nice. It's business, upgrade. So I'll just do that and just check and see what that costs to go to London. That ticket is $6,800. Like, whoa, no, I don't think so.
I guess if you're flexible, I'm seeing a lot of like 6:30 round trip right now on Google Flights. That's not too bad.
Oh, that's actually
good. You mean 6:30 a.m.?
Probably some horrible thing, yeah.
Yeah, well, out of here it's a 5:30 a.m. flight. So, but there was just a thing on the BBC this morning about Heathrow being one of the most expensive airports there is. They have huge per passenger fees that they tack on to everybody going through there.
Well, maybe I should fly into Charles de Gaulle and then hop over from there.
Take the train.
There you go.
The train from Paris to London is great. It's like 2 hours, and if you catch it right, you can, you can actually find tickets for $70-$80 or something.
And if you ever spend a night in Paris, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying. I killed two birds with one stone.
Kind of nice, actually.
Because the last time I was in Paris, I was there for, you know, it's just you're going through Charles de Gaulle and you're headed to Germany. It's just like that was a bleep out the window. You know?
No, Paris is a nice place to visit.
I might have to check into that. All right, anybody else have any questions for the man himself?
I have a question for Barry relative to the equipment. May I?
Sure.
So you're using a number of interfaces, and it's a personal studio. I assume it's mostly for overdubs and mixing. How many analog paths are you using? First of all, you're doing 2-channel stereo mixes, and then how many additional analog paths are you using?
Okay.
I know you use a lot of outboard gear.
Okay. It's kind of complicated. I have 32 analog to some. I use an SSL Sigma. So there's 32 channels coming from two 16-channel Avid boxes, right? And that output of the Sigma goes into the analog digital converter and is recorded into Pro Tools, so I can playlist all the mixes. That makes sense. The rest of the gear all has dedicated interfaces. So I have 32 more channels of IO for all of this gear so that it all shows up like a plugin.
Right.
So if I want, I don't know, pick one of those things, a retro piece, I want it on the lead vocal. It comes right up in the template, right up in the piece of gear. So it's all delay compensated and all that happy stuff, and you use it just like a plugin.
Got it. So as you go through,
the last box is the H9000, which is made by Eventide, and it has a DigiLink connector to my second HDX card, and that's 32 channels in and out of the card. So that's 4. Let's see if it's 4. There's effect send 1 is 4 stereo effects. So I have those times 4. So 32 channels there.
All right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Dave's device is a number of word sources, but also one converter with analog.
Right.
And so what do you use for that converter channel in your mix path?
So I have an SSL X patch box. It was a short-lived piece made by SSL years ago, and it's a matrix, a router. It's a 16 by 16 router. So when I'm recording microphones or whatever, then they show up, the output of the preamps show up in the matrix, and I just route them to 2 channels or 1 channel of the A to D. And when I'm mixing, then I route the output of the Sigma to the A to D.
Got it. Thank you.
That's how we roll around here. Yeah. Now, you might figure out that that when I am summing and all that stuff, there's a lot of latency. So you can't overdub while I'm in that sum mode. You have to launch a conventional Pro Tools template. There's too much A to D, D to A to D, going on for it to keep up.
Wow.
So, but mixing's fine.
Hey Dave, any new plugins in the works?
Yeah, a lot. Dave has some cool stuff.
Yes.
Tell him.
I was hoping to have it kind of running now. However, all sorts of things have been getting in the way from getting there. Some of it was finishing this compressor, and now we're dealing with my mother who's 91 and is basically lost reality. So that's a big mess. I think dealing with my brothers and sisters are worse. And the other thing is we're going to release Phoenix in the existing plugins in VST format also. But all of that was supposed to be kind of working by now too. So everything's a few months behind. But life seems to get in the way.
Hear you. I use Phoenix literally on every session, every single session. I use Phoenix. Like sometimes I shift EQs, sometimes I shift compressors, something like that. Every single time I use Phoenix.
Yeah, it solves a lot of problems.
Is there a difference between the quantum and the head on
the signal processing algorithm's the same?
But I mean, you have the tape and pentoid and is there any difference with the tape emulation on those two?
No, the signal processing is the same. It had to get rewritten to a different processor chip, but went from a 24-bit chip to a 32-bit chip, but the signal processing is the same.
Cool, dude. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
Anybody else got anything for Mr. Hill before we all leave?
So we'll have Nate from Cali in August. In July is we're going to have Paul Wolf and SSL. That'll be pretty good. And in August will be Nate and Alan from Trident, and he'll be talking about the new Trident channel, which I have one here for review. Is really nice.
Alan Hyatt.
Hyatt, right? Alan Hyatt. And that'll be August. And then after that, I don't know. Tony, what do you got?
Somebody's going to pop up, believe me, or somebody will drop out and we'll have to shift everything around again.
Of course.
Yeah, well, I'm always available, so.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, well, thank you.
We appreciate y'all coming. If you have any questions for Dave or anything, hit us up and we'll get in touch and maybe we'll have him back or something like that. Especially if you're going to do AES. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.